Hey everyone, so it's time for another report, and this is a pretty darn big one. EA have essentially spoke to why Anthem and RagTag failed. They've doubled down on narrative games, and now they've sent Vince Zampella, Respawn's CEO, over to DICE LA, ideally to work that Respawn Entertainment magic again. This all comes from an LA Times interview. Turns out that Vince's goal is to rebrand DICE LA and to get it to work on new IP. Vince has said that he wants to shed the image that they're just a support studio for DICE Stockholm, something that I imagine the devs over there will like quite a bit. And this move is being overseen by EA's chief studio officer, Laura, I think Melee. So she said that the focus is to broaden EA's portfolio and to make DICE LA a full standalone studio. And I mean, yeah, I guess having an entire studio in the extremely expensive LA region just isn't really worth supporting only Battlefield. Then she also said, in what sounds like a tacit admission of failure, that she learned a bunch from seeing how Respawn Entertainment work. And I mean, man, it's insane that like what I'm about to say is true here. It really is. Apparently, the experimental attitude and rapid prototyping of Respawn has rubbed off in EA. She said that they are now highly encouraging teams to prototype and to prove out game type, game flow, and game features before they, quote, make it look pretty for executive presentations. That they didn't know that years ago is madness. So, I mean, what does that remind you of? Two games, Star Wars RagTag and, of course, Anthem. And now that we're a little bit in, be sure to smash that like button to gently caress that subscription button. If you really feel mad, maybe even press it. Pretty insane, right? So, this Anthem situation and the RagTag situation, I think it's best to just go in on Anthem. So Anthem is a game that basically was in, I don't want to say development hell, right? Because for the first few years, the staff were super hyped, super excited. They were making these really cool looking prototypes that just looked gorgeous. That were, proving just unique little ideas for the game and then really taking them through in a physical execution. And then it turned out the game was actually pretty darn bad. And then, it wasn't really working and they pretty much realized, crap, we need to scrub this thing up, and they spent a lot of time making it look really good for a presentation to Patrick Soderlund, who right now is actually not with EA. He did leave the company, but that's what ended up happening. And then the version of the game that Patrick Soderlund gave his, emphatic clappy clap clap to, well, that's the version of the game that ended up coming out and, of course, failing horribly. And we'll later on in this video go into the story of Amy Hennig's failed project Star Wars RagTag, but that's one that also had a similar thing happen. And I mean, yeah, prototyping. That's one of the first things, like in any software engineering degree or anything like that. It's all about, an agile process, testing out your ideas super quick. It's seemingly EA were so focused on making marketable presentations for executives. That is sheer madness, but it seems to be the case, and looking at some of their more recent games, it absolutely isn't a surprise. Now, as for Respawn Entertainment, I think there's more good news here. So Vince basically said that now he's just coaching them. So the Fallen Order director, he is going to be leading a narrative-driven branch of Respawn, and they're working the Fallen Order sequel. As for Apex, well, there's people taking care of that. The same goes for Medal of Honor VR, and that means that Vince is now free to head over to DICE LA. So what impact is this actually going to have, right? It's hard to say, but I think there's one thing for sure. This is a fantastic move from EA, and it's also a sharp pivot from how they used to do things. This is maybe the smartest step they've taken in years. I mean, it actually looks like they got a little taste of the huge boost of user sentiment that they got from Apex and from Fallen Order, and that they like it. I mean, it's kind of sad that EA, voted worst company in America twice, has just gotten a PR win by releasing a zero BS core game. Being real, that should be the bare minimum, not something that we're cheering, but, I mean, relatively speaking, that's where we are in the industry now. Of course, most of the credit for that went to Respawn, I'd say rightfully so, but also EA did support and fund it, earning praise from a core audience. I mean, that's fairly new to EA these days, and seemingly they know how to do it again, and that is repeating that formula. I mean, yeah, give a gameplay-focused studio some popular IP, and you might actually win. Now that said, Respawn do actually deserve more credit here. I think an easy comparison to make is EA's previous Star Wars project, RagTag. Now that died in 2017 after EA shuttered the studio, clearly unhappy with the progress. Now, there are a ton of reasons why that may have been the case. And I mean, based on interviews, it actually seems like, yeah, there were a whole bunch of reasons. So according to Jason Schreier's coverage of Visceral Games, the studio had a whole ton of problems. They had massive ambition, and yes, they were trying to keep EA execs happy with demos. Now, Anthem was largely, of course, the same as I covered. I mean, just look at the images that we've seen of RagTag. Clearly a lot of effort went into making a highly polished vertical slice gameplay demo to, prove it to publishers. And that is right in line with the story of BioWare crunching to show Patrick Soderlund that demo that he would approve of that ultimately led to the failed version of Anthem. Now, based on this flawed approach that they took with their studios, as well as the skyrocketing costs of development of the last two console generations, and it's pretty darn clear that a change was needed here. I mean, it seems so obvious to us now, but yeah, a lower budget, core market focused game well made by a good team, that's kind of rare in the era of AAA blockbusters, and Respawn have apparently shone their light on that to EA. Now, what I think is pretty interesting here is we've heard a lot about Vince Zampella's power within EA games, and how basically because of Vince, Respawn have just been able to do what they want. Things like continuing to make, say, Titanfall 2 on a modified Source engine. Same goes for Apex Legends. Using Unreal Engine 4 in order to make Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. That goes completely against the EA, top-down directive of, we're EA and we use Frostbite for everything, which of course just wreaked havoc in Amy Hennig's team at Visceral Games for Star Wars RagTag. Of course, Battlefield's had its fair share of issues, even though that's the engine that's made for that game. And of course, BioWare, who were just seemingly ravaged by it. But apparently, Vince, being on the EA board, being a pretty powerful guy, has been able to sort of shield Respawn, from that. And I think what's really happened here is that Vince has just been like, no. Our team at Respawn are going to do this way. They're going to do it our way. And we're just going to see what happens. And then it turns out Vince's way, they followed through on it. It actually works. It produces EA Games' core hits of the last year. And maybe the rest of EA think, shit, he was right. I guess we'll have to do that now. And that seems to be what's happening here. And maybe it's the case that, Visceral Games, they just were not shielded from EA's directives in the same way that Respawn have been. Amy Hennig was probably not able to say, actually, can we use Unreal and can we do all of these things that, will help us make this game good? No, clearly that was not possible. Then another interesting thing is, RagTag, its problems led to the studio going under. What about BioWare? I mean, it's had so many problems with Anthem, which took 5-6 years, and I've got to wonder, why close Visceral but keep BioWare open? And for that one, I think it's decently simple. BioWare's got a strong back catalog that probably sells okay. They've also got an ongoing MMO, which, I mean, I can't imagine it's that big, but also, I would imagine that by, primarily being focused in Canada, there are more tax incentives and that the running costs of BioWare are a little bit less. And that also they do have a lot of vets, a lot of institutional talent there. Now, a lot of that could be said for Visceral, but seemingly Visceral had other issues combined with far higher costs of running, and that's why they got the axe. Seemingly, it doesn't appear to be like that with BioWare, and while BioWare have maybe not been able to shield themselves from being just, glued to the Frostbite engine, maybe by this stage, after making so many games, they actually have a toolkit that allows them to work in that engine, and perhaps that's maybe why BioWare are they're not in a great state right now, but they do seem to have a lot of projects in the works, and I've got to imagine they'll be more successful than their last few outings. Now that said, this is all about business and money, right? I mean, talking about RagTag and Fallen Order in the same breath, a part of that's a little unfair given just how much the industry has changed in really just a few years. I mean, 2019 had loot boxes and monetization under more scrutiny than ever, and from actual governments. And, as we know, FIFA made $1.2 billion in 2019, but a ton of that was from FIFA Ultimate Team, which could be regulated in the future. So any good business will know to diversify and to have contingencies for changes in regulation and the market, and EA will probably see the writing on the wall before anyone else does, thus creating their own games that will draw people into their brand and their platform. Origin, that is going to be extremely important for them. I mean, the issue that EA have clearly had here is they've not had enough good core hits. They have had core devs, but, Anthem and Battlefield 5 really haven't been as good as they could have been. But, Respawns have done well. I think the reality is that the last few gens have just made EA end up specializing in a few niches like sports. And without Vince and Respawn, EA's portfolio would literally just be sports, Battlefield, and The Sims, right? I mean, those things make a ton of money now, sure, right? But no exec is going to be happy with that. Not in a market as massive as gaming is. Now, they've got their own platform, they've got Origin, and that has its own subscription service for access to games. And, just as movie and TV services have actually shown, content is king, and from a lot of their core devs, EA has had little to show. Their stated goal is to provide, content for players, to get the players onto their platform, into their service, and then, to hope that they can probably bring them into the more heavily monetized games. And, honestly, they utterly failed on that until Fallen Order came along. Fallen Order, it's not that innovative, it's not perfectly executed, but it is a very, very good, very well executed game from an EA studio, and that does, funny enough, make it exceptional. And while it seems to have sold excellently, personally, I'm far more interested in how many Origin Premium subs it's actually brought to them. It's a sub 20-hour game. You can finish that in a few sittings, right? And then you can cancel your premium sub. I wonder, though, how many people will check out other EA games or, indies that they've got on Origin, and how many of them will actually stay. I mean, EA obviously knew that people could just get, Origin Premium for a month and then leave. That would be a third of the game's RRP. So they've clearly taken that into account. And it's interesting, they're seemingly trying to use quality to get people in the door with Origin and to build that Origin Access platform. A bit like how Microsoft will try to do that with Game Pass, putting Halo Infinite on it, right? And, that makes a lot of sense. It's actually rather akin to God of War, right? To a big console exclusive that's trying to sell you the console. Well, just, it's not the console this time, it's a big exclusive that is trying to sell you the platform. And to be honest, if they're going to be selling that platform by just making really good core games, then fair enough. That's the market as it should work. That they are doing this with Vince, that basically there's another studio and they want to repeat the Respawn success story, that makes a lot of sense. That does show their intent via action. It seems to be, to do core games. Now, the other thing then is they're technically pulling away, the Battlefield support studio. That is fairly interesting. And what I would imagine here is they've learned a decent bit from Battlefield 5. So, Battlefield 5, when did it do badly? Well, when they focused on multiplayer, or single player even, and a battle royale that I don't think anyone really wanted. And it's perfectly fine, but I don't think it actually pushes Battlefield 5 that much. So, the battle royale seems to have been a big waste of time, and the single player also a pretty big waste of time. What is the thing that Battlefield fans want? Like myself, lifelong Battlefield player since 1942 on the PC when I was, a good bit smaller than I am now. We want more maps. We want more guns. We want more Battlefield content. We don't want a battle royale. We don't really want single player. And I've got to wonder if the next Battlefield games are actually just going to acknowledge that and to focus on core content. I mean, look at Battlefield 5. It was doing poorly when all of those, superfluous things were there. When did it start doing well? Well, when they did the Pacific and they just started, putting more Battlefield content in there. So I've got to imagine that with Battlefield, we're going to see more of a return there, and that maybe means that DICE LA is a bit more free for other projects. Then the other thing, I suppose, is BioWare. I've got to wonder how much these directives will actually impact BioWare. I mean, BioWare had so much success working on Unreal 3, and I believe they eventually did heavily modify Unreal 3 for future versions of the Mass Effect series, but clearly it worked. I mean, they made Mass Effect 3 in 18 months. That's insane. Now, Mass Effect 3 was not perfect, but that game existed in 18 months of dev time is an absolute goddamn miracle. That's not something they could have done with Frostbite, obviously. So perhaps with, either maybe Frostbite tools being in a good state now that, it's wrecked the company for, almost a decade, but they have got a bunch of good tools out of it, maybe 5-6 years. Maybe that will allow them to do better. Or maybe after seeing Vince just be like, now we're going to use Unreal and we're going to make a really good game on time and on budget, maybe top EA brass will actually let BioWare have the freedom that they probably do want to have. Indeed, if you were to characterize BioWare's recent failures as meddling from EA, trying to live serviceify things, trying to force Frostbite, maybe, Respawn's successes and the reasons there, maybe that could have a good, sort of brush off effect on BioWare. And as somebody who has historically loved BioWare games, not recently, of course, that would be really good to see. There are so many great creatives there. They make great stuff. Some of my favorite games, favorite stories, and they just haven't done that in so long. And it's so sad to see. So hopefully, there could be a little bit of hope for BioWare. But anyway, that's it for this video. Vince Zampella, I don't know, gaming Jesus. He's walking about town, maybe fixing studios, maybe doing good things, and maybe we will see more core games in the future of EA, which certainly would be nice. Let me know what you think about all this down below, and with that, I will see you next time.